Okay. Well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone, depending on your time zone. And welcome to our webinar series, Navigating Legislation and the Higg Index. I'm Gabriele Vallero, Public Affairs Manager at Cascale, and today we will focus on one of our Higg facility tools, Higg FSLM. And we will explore how it relates to SLCP's CAF and how this tool can support you in your social compliance obligations. With that, we are thrilled that you're tuning in here with us. And now some quick housekeeping remarks for this webinar. Due to the number of attendees, you will be muted during the presentation, and the chat function will be turned off. Please ask your question using the Q&A function during the webinar, and feel free to upvote the most relevant ones, the ones you consider more relevant. We'll do our best to address these questions during our Q&A at the very end of the webinar. So this webinar is co-hosted by Cascale, Worldly, and SLCP. For those who don't know us yet, Cascale, formerly known as the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, is a global non-for-profit alliance that empowers collaboration to drive equitable and restorative business practices in the consumer goods industry. Our membership spans over 300 manufacturers, retailers, brands, academia, industry associations, nonprofits, and more. Our global membership base is united by a singular vision to give back more than we take to the planet and its people. Cascale owns and develops the Higg Index, the leading value chain environmental and social impact measurement methodology. These tools are exclusively available on Worldly. Worldly is the most comprehensive sustainability data insights platform, empowering businesses to scale responsibility into their global operations faster and more accurately. Hosting, connecting with, and supporting the leading industry solutions and methodology, including ZDHC, BlueSign, and the Higg Index. Worldly delivers the insights businesses need to reduce their impact, comply with emerging regulatory and financial disclosure requirements, and meet the expectations of a new generation of customers. Finally, the Social and Labor Convergence Program, or SLCP, is a multi-stakeholder initiative driving decent work in global supply chains. SLCP's universal social assessment tool, the Converged Assessment Framework, or CAF, is the backbone of Cascale's Higg FSLM and provides credible and actionable data, enabling stakeholders to redirect resources towards meaningful improvements. SLCP aims to support stakeholders accessing credible and actionable social and labor data for human rights due diligence implementation and enable collaborative solutions to improve working conditions. Together, our organization make the Higg Index, particularly the FSLM, possible, accessible, and impactful for organizations serving the consumer goods industry. Today, there are over 40,000 Higg Index users worldwide. Now, a few words on collaboration. In February this year, SLCP and Cascale deepened their strategic collaboration to better align tools and strategies to improve global working conditions. In the recent Public Affairs Joint Vision Statement, SLCP and Cascale outlined a common strategy to enhance policy engagement and advocate for improved working conditions in the global textile, apparel, footwear, and consumer goods industries. Our speakers today will cover key initiatives of this collaboration in a bit more detail later in the presentation. So I will cut it short here, and we can go through our agenda for today. So today, as you can see in the screen, we will cover key legislation, Higg FSLM and SLCP CAF explain. We will see the mapping that SLCP has developed of the tools with legislation. We're going to talk about industry alignment. We're going to see the tools in action, and we're going to end, wrap up with a Q&A and some closing remarks. Now, today, it's my pleasure to introduce you to a great panel of experts from Cascale, SLCP, and Worldly. So to start with, Elisabeth von Reitzestein, Senior Director of Public Affairs at Cascale, Orin de Souza, Senior Manager of the Higg Facility Tools Higg FSLM at Cascale, Tom Mason, Senior Policy and Stakeholder Engagement Manager at SLCP, and Vic Lau, Customer Success Manager for APAC at Worldly. So warm welcome to all of you. And now let's dive into legislation. Elisabeth, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Gabby. And good morning, good afternoon, good night, everybody. Indeed, today we witness a rapidly changing landscape in the field of human rights and forced labor legislation. That what does it mean? It's a unique opportunity to align with transformative goals in social responsibility. Also, it means an increasing focus to demonstrate ethical practices and to showcase ethical practices throughout the value chain, because they are key pieces of legislation which are driving this shift and setting clearer standards for social compliance, both in the EU and the US. So this is the two key market legislation we are touching upon today. So this slide provides an overview of the legislation we will be looking at today. And this is the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or short CSDDD. It's the German Supply Chain Act, or indeed Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. It's the US New York Fashion Act, which is, however, still in a negotiation phase. There is the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the field of human rights reporting, and also in the area of forced labor legislation. There's the US UGA Forced Labor Preventive Act and the EU Forced Labor Regulation. Indeed, for the manufacturers or companies, it is important to understand these requirements and in order to help foster equitable and restorative business practices. In the next slides, we will be diving a bit deeper in these pieces, and voila. So now to start with the EU CSDDD. I would like to start with that one because it's a crucial piece of legislation and also will be covered, and a bit more later on by Tom's assessment. So what does this piece of legislation mean? It will require companies to address human rights issues within their chain of activities as of July 2027. It will also have an impact of manufacturers, which is what we would like to focus on today. And also, I should say though that these impacts I'm listing here and also henceforth, they are examples of possible impacts, but also this whole has to be seen as a holistic picture of different impacts, different implications, not only even though we attributed this to this particular piece of legislation, but they are also seen as a whole and across the different policies. So I just wanted to say this as a preemptive comment. So for the EU CSDDD, what does it mean? So there will be an increased demand for sustainability information, greater accountability for those contributing to adverse impacts, and also the need for collective investment into due diligence measures. When I say collective, I mean collective across the value chain. Brands need to invest in that very heavily. Also, manufacturers would be very much encouraged to invest into these measures. On the German Supply Chain Act, this is a piece of legislation which applies to indirect business partners of large German companies. And yeah, possible examples of impacts are encouragement for direct suppliers to upload standards throughout the supply chain, commitment to fulfilling contractual agreements, and also enhanced focus on quality assurance and regular assessments. However, as a side note here, in the current political climate, as we witness it in Germany these days, it might be that this act might not actually survive the end of the year, because also the EU CSWD will also, of course, apply in Germany as one of the member states of the European Union. So this, as a footnote on the German Act. US New York Fashion Act, again, this is also, as I said at the beginning, it is a piece which is still negotiating, it's still in the draft stage. I will not go as far and say what happened tonight in the United States will impact that. It's too early to call that. However, we are, of course, looking at the piece as it is right now. So what does it mean for manufacturers with New York-based fashion sellers as clients? It could be like enhanced attention to client practices, including exploring responsible transition strategies, encouragement to align with OECD guidelines for responsible business conduct, and an emphasis on improving wages and working conditions. In the next slide, I would like to quickly look at the area of human rights reporting. And implications of manufacturers, their examples of implications. So there we have the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, short CSRD. So there it is, the application date depends on the size of the company, but the first reports will be due already in January 2025. So what does it mean for manufacturers within the supply chain of in-scope companies? So it's there will be increased data requests, most likely also improved. It will give an opportunity of improved alignment with international and European sustainability reporting standards. So if you are interested to learn more about CSRD and these reporting standards, do feel free to check out our past webinar on BRM and CSRD, where we went very much into detail that. Yes, I do see it. It appeared in the chat, so feel free to click on the link. But also you can find all of our webinars on YouTube. So yes, what else does it mean? So there's also the advantage of more efficient data gathering and sharing, and there will be an increasing importance of traceability and transparency across the chain. So there, just very quickly here, as like showing in this very beautiful graphic, thanks to our comms colleagues, there is a complementarity of CSRD and CSDDD. So that means CSRD requires companies to publicly report their sustainability performance and impacts. Whereas in CSDDD, yes, there's a requirement companies to prevent and mitigate adverse human rights practices. And indeed, reporting informs action, and action improves reporting. So with that, I would like to come to the next area, which is forced labor legislation. So there's the US UGA Forced Labor Preventive Act. So that means that it is having an impact on companies sourcing from Xinjiang, China, and exporting to the US since June 2025. So, but again, what does it mean for manufacturers exporting to the United States? There is an opportunity to enhance market access by meeting the new standards. Also, again, you've heard this before, increased transparency through comprehensive tracing and documentation expectations. Also, ensuring shipment readiness to avoid potential delays, and also an encouragement to manufacturers to explore diverse sourcing options. Now coming to the EU forced labor regulation. So this is like the EU version of it, which is currently in the finalizing stages. So yes, the European Parliament adopted its final position. So sorry, take a step back. European Union, we have European Parliament, we have European Council, we have European Commission, or let's say the Council of the EU. So in the EU, the European Parliament adopted its final position in late October, and the Council is expected to do so by late November, so later this month. And we do expect the text to apply at the end of 2027, or as of 2027. It differs from the US Act because it's a EU ban on imported goods made with forced labor, regardless of the origin. So exactly, yeah, it doesn't matter where produced. If there's forced labor, and the products will not be permitted in the European Union. So again, this what does it mean for manufacturers? For example, is opportunities to strengthen market access by meeting evolving standards, prompt implementation of thorough due diligence processes. It's recommended. Of course, also to opportunity to demonstrate commitment to ethical practices through clear proof that ethical products are free from forced labor. Yes, so what does it mean again, right? So the message is clear. Responsible business practices are no longer optional. There is now legislation in place regulating this space. However, again, as we said, it bears like a lot of opportunities for new market access. And we now explore how these legal framework will further be able to turn into, in the very practical sense, opportunities for positive change. And now a little teaser, how Higg FSLM and CAF can support you on your social compliance journeys. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth. That's a lot of new legislation to take in. We see the sector will have to really roll up its sleeve to prepare for what's coming. Now let's learn a bit more about the Higg FSLM CAF. Orin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabby, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. When it comes to the allotment abbreviation, we did speak about FSLM, we did speak about CAF. What does it mean? FSLM is Facility Social Labor Module. CAF is Converge Assessment Framework. So wherever you see this is an abbreviation. So how does it work? So FSLM is a tool which is adopted by CAF, and CAF is something which is developed by SLCP. That means all the questions which is there in CAF is being adopted for FSLM. And the assessment, the social labor assessment covers all the areas which you can see in the screen, to name it: recruitment and hiring, working hours, like employment treatment, to name few. So these are the areas which has been covered when it comes to CAF FSLM. And this is one of an example which we can say that how SLCP and Cascale are working together to provide a consistent framework, and which builds it. It is a data tool which supports in seeing how the social performance is, reduce the audit for fatigue, and how we can also work on allowing this data to compare yourself within the other industry and work towards the improvement plan, avoid to have a resources to improvement plan versus towards an audit. Am I the one who can? Okay, yeah. So when we go to our next slide, this slide was a bit blurred. So as I said earlier, the backbone of FSLM is CAF. CAF is Converge Assessment Framework. We follow the questions which is there in CAF, and that is the backbone. And when it comes to the requirement, we also see that all our members are being requested or are being informed to follow the CAF or to adopt the CAF. This is it means that Cascale's primary tool is FSLM CAF, so that we see there is a more adoption, and also the industries can follow the verification through the CAF, and we can get one data. And when it comes to CAF is also checks the facilities like international and international standards, and also local national labor laws, so that we can also follow same thing throughout the industry. And it also helps in providing the data uniform, because we also follow the same verification process as what is being derived by SLCP. When it comes to CAF, it doesn't provide any score. Hence, Cascale has taken a lead and taken an initiative to provide the scoring methodology, through which we can also see how the risks are there, how the data can be read, look at the social performance, and further build a corrective action plan or improvement plan needed for the industry. By this, over to Gabby.
Thank you, Orin. Now, let's use what we've learned from the two previous sections and see how SLCP mapped FSLM against the relevant legislations to provide the best solutions to Higg users. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gabby. And a brief introduction again. My name's Tom. I'm leading the policy work at SLCP. You've just received a lot of new terms, information, acronyms, jargon. So I'm going to try and break it down to be as simple as possible in the context of these pretty technical pieces of information that are coming through within the policy landscape. So as we enter this very newly regulated environment for the industry, both for brands, but also all supply chain actors, the CAF data that we're capturing is going to be used more and more for legal compliance. So traditionally, this information and the way the tool was created was more for voluntary implementation of international frameworks or brands' own code of conduct. So our job now, which is Cascale, Worldly, and SLCP together, is to ensure that our tools are fit for purpose to support navigating legislation. You as manufacturers and also as all stakeholders as within the industry have told us that you want us to take on this role, and that's what we're going to do. So we've covered a bit about the what the legislation is and why, but now we're going to try and focus the attention on to actually like how are we going to approach this legislation using the CAF and FSLM. And we need to ensure that the CAF tool is remaining or being fit for purpose to be able to support you or your buyers with compliance and proper implementation beyond just minimum basic compliance. So for us at SLCP, a critical stakeholder within the policy discussion is our manufacturer base. We know and we're very aware that manufacturers are obviously going to be impacted by the legislation. So we need to make sure that the tools that we're implementing are designed to be effective with this in mind. For SLCP, we have over 15,000 facilities registered in our gateway. Some of you are probably here today. And we have a responsibility to make sure that you're collecting credible and actionable social and labor data that is attractive for buyers that are looking to comply or needing to comply with legislation in the EU, the US, and beyond, as Elizabeth has talked through already. So when we're approaching legislation, think of it as like a four-pronged approach to legislation. So the first one, which is really the focus of today's discussion, is CAF tool alignment. So making sure that the tool, the CAF, is actually, and the type of data we're capturing is aligned with legal demands and are meeting the needs of you as our stakeholders. The second, which I'll go into more detail in a minute, is knowledge sharing and or capacity building. The third, which is part of what we're doing today, is engaging with the industry. So making sure that SLCP and Cascale are considered credible and practical stakeholders by policymakers, governments, and also you as the industry stakeholders to implement legislation. And we do this by putting on events like this, engaging with different stakeholders, collaborating between ourselves to make sure that what we're doing and how we're positioning ourselves and the tool is aligned in the context of legislation, and organizing roundtables and events and trainings. And this is really critical to making sure that we're all on the same page when you're using the CAF or FSLM for legislation purposes. And the fourth, which is advocacy. So governments and policymakers need to be able to consider the CAF or SLCP data as useful for legal compliance. So what we do is trying to engage governments and policymakers in the EU, but also in the US and also in local countries, to ensure that they understand what the role is and how of the CAF and FSLM, how the tool has been designed, and why it's fit for purpose for supporting legislation. And this is something that we work very closely with our policy partner, Policy Hub, through their due diligence work on as well. So jumping onto the next slide, in the context of aligning SLCP, we're following a rigorous process to make sure that the CAF that you're using in your facilities can support the right data for legislation. So what we do as SLCP, which is important context for the way that we go about mapping, is firstly, we analyze the new pieces of legislation. So Elizabeth has already gone through, I think, 5 or 6 different legislative frameworks that are coming or are being adopted today. There's so many more out there. So these are just a few examples of the main ones that are relevant in the context of the CAF. There's different pieces of transparency legislation and forced labor legislation coming through globally. And these are things that we all take into consideration when we're understanding what are the legislative impacts and relevance to the CAF. The second, which we naturally do, particularly for key pieces of legislation, is undertake a gap analysis. So what is the legislation asking us? And then what type of data are we capturing in the CAF? If there's mismatches or there's misalignment or there's gaps, then we look to see, is it our role to fill this gap or is it someone else's role? So we're not going to start going into details in the FSLM about environmental or scope 3 emissions or something, because that's not what the tool is designed for. However, legislation will still ask for that information. So you can turn to tools like the FEM to support you with that. So there's different ways to look at the gaps and understand what our role is and to be able to fill that in. The third, which is the third step we take, is seek expert feedback particularly on specific topics that require thematic or topic experts. So we know that we're not ourselves the experts of everything to do with not just legislation, but also every topic there is around social compliance. So there are experts out there that we're closely partnered with, and we can work through them to make sure that we're designing a tool that is taking on the expert's perspective in mind. And one of the main experts or organizations that we work with externally to get validation and to co-design and develop our tool is the ILO Better Work program. So ILO Better Work co-develop step 1 of our tool, which is the broad social compliance step, to make sure that the tool, to ensure that we maximize our alignment with the ILO's core labor standards and ILO conventions. And these are critical parts to many of these pieces of legislation that Elizabeth already mentioned. The last step we do, which is when we've taken on all of this information, is we revise, remove, or add data points to the CAF. So part of this process is really bringing all the analysis and information to our CAF task force, who are in charge of endorsing the future version of the CAF. And this task force is made up of SLCP signatories. So if you're a manufacturer or stakeholder, that's also an SLCP signatory, which is many of the Cascale members. You're also able to join this task force if this is something that you want to help guide and influence. So please do get in touch if that's something of interest, and we can see how we can involve you as well, because it's not just brands that are creating these CAF questions, it's also manufacturers and other stakeholders, given we're multi-stakeholder initiatives. So jumping to the next slide, as I've previously mentioned, part of our approach to legislation is knowledge sharing activities. So what we want to do here is make sure that all of this information that's coming from these policymakers in Brussels or Washington, it's all legalese. It's all written in the context of a legal form as legislation. So what we need to do is make sure that that information can be translated into practical information so that you understand what it actually means and how we can incorporate it into our daily practices. These are what we do to try and ensure that we can help filter through key pieces of information coming in the context of legislation. Is we undertake training sessions. We also conduct events and presentations, and also engagement activities with our stakeholders in our supply chain. And we do this with Cascale and Worldly as well. And we're definitely looking to do more of this next year, particularly around our manufacturer base. So stay in touch and keep an ear out for more information there. What we also do is make sure that on the legislative requirements, we're also training and building knowledge in the context of our staff and our broader signatory base as well. So with this, what we do is we've developed guidances on relevant pieces of information, including the toolkit, the HRDD toolkit, the CSRD guidance document, and various blogs and position papers, which all cover in much more detail information needed to understand legislation. But what I'm going to do now is jump firstly into the HRDD toolkit, which we've excitingly relaunched only a couple of weeks ago. The toolkit is a key resource for us to communicate to you how the CAF is aligned with different pieces of human rights due diligence legislation. So human rights due diligence legislation, as Elizabeth mentioned before, there's various different updates going on just even within this scope. You may already be familiar with the OECD guidelines or the UN guiding principles. These are things that have been around for decades, but these pieces of legislation, what they're doing is they're taking these existing frameworks on an international level and creating and making them a mandatory legislation. So they need to translate this voluntary to mandatory through this. What we've done here is we've tried to then translate these different requirements or expectations into an easily digestible way that we can communicate to you how the CAF is useful. And this is our main objective of the toolkit, to ensure that we can communicate how the CAF can support stakeholders to implement legislation, and how SLCP data or FSLM data as well is aligned with emerging policy expectations. So I won't go into much more detail, but I would encourage you all to download the toolkit via the link in the chat and give it a read, or at least know that it's a reference point if you are looking for more information at a later stage as well. So jumping onto the next slide, I think it's really important in the context, particularly of the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which Elizabeth mentioned before, to understand what is actually the role of the FSLM or SLCP. What is our scope, and how does that fit into the broader CSDDD scope? So you can see here on the screen, the scope of CSDDD is for the whole supply chain. This means all the way through from raw materials and extraction, all the way through to distribution and downstream as well. Now you can see here on the screen that with SLCP and the CAF is only implemented in the manufacturing or facility stages of the supply chain. So this means that even if you are using SLCP in your or the CAF in tier 1, 2, and 3, and also in your distribution center of your brand, then that's still not going to cover all of the stages of the supply chain that need to be understood when you're doing your due diligence. For SLCP, we have about 50% of our facilities using SLCP, which are tier 1, which makes up the bulk of assessments that go on year. Tier 2 it covers 25%, and this was up to over 2,300 facilities last year. So this is increasing more and more as the expectations for due diligence increase. And lastly, we also are seeing quite a number of brands now using SLCP and the CAF in their distribution centers as well. So you can see here that while as we talk about the role of the CAF and FSLM in the context of navigating legislation, it's important to keep in mind that this isn't a one-stop shop. We're not trying to create a tool that is going to help you with your whole compliance needs. It has a specific role, and it needs to be used in the context of other measures and activities to help comply with legislation. So jumping on to the next slide, what's also good context to provide to you today is what the actual role of SLCP and the CAF is in the context of human rights due diligence. As I mentioned, human rights due diligence, it's the primary framework around social compliance that's coming through in the EU, US, and beyond. SLCP's CAF can be used to help identify and assess impacts in the facilities in the supply chain. So this is a specific role in the 6-step framework, which is typically used to describe the HRDD process. So what companies will need to do is identify the risks, and one way of doing this is using the CAF. So you can find legal compliances within a CAF assessment, and that can be used to help understand, okay, where are we going to undertake measures to seize, prevent, and mitigate adverse impacts. What the CAF can also then do is support in tracking and monitoring how we're going with implementation. So if there's an issue that's found in a CAF assessment, let's say there's an occupational health and safety issue found in a CAF assessment this year, what the facility or with stakeholders will need to do is go away, seize, prevent, and mitigate that issue so it doesn't happen again. And then the following year's CAF, we can come in and understand, okay, is that still a problem or not, by tracking and monitoring progress against these issues. So that's a very high level snapshot as to what the role is within the HRDD process. But what we've done within the HRDD toolkit on the next slide is we've gone into more detail around this specific mapping. So if you're a brand complying, this could be useful in the context of understanding how SLCP can be and can support with CSDDD as an example. If you're a manufacturer and you want to understand in a bit more detail what type of risks are covered within the CAF, this is also really insightful. And I know it's a lot of detail on a screen right now, but if you go and look at the toolkit and take a moment to read through, it's really good knowledge, particularly for facilities and users of the FSLM and the tool. So what we can see here is what we've done, which is mapped both against the scope of the tool, and then also the steps of due diligence. So I've already talked a bit about the steps of due diligence, the identification and the tracking and monitoring. There's also a mapping that needs to be done around the scope of the tool. So we can see here there's a number of different topics that are partially addressed or fully addressed or not addressed within the CAF. And an example we could give here is if you're a manufacturer and there's discrimination of workers in the facility, this is something that needs to be addressed in the context of human rights due diligence and the CSDDD. So with the CAF, what the role is there's questions in the CAF around discrimination. So you could use the CAF, or the CAF could be used as a tool for understanding this risk, and then you would need to go on and seize, prevent, and mitigate those adverse impacts. So jumping on to the next slide, you may be asking yourself, why would I use the CAF or the FSLM in the context of human rights due diligence? We're very well aware that there's a lot of proprietary tools out there. There's a lot of other different industry schemes. So these are things that are within the broader industry, but there are some specific reasons why the CAF should be or can be used, and adding a unique value add in the context of HRDD in particular. So the first one is the CAF is a foundational social assessment. This is something that you need to implement in a facility to get a basic understanding of what type of risks or issues there are in the manufacturing stage of the supply chain. Then after this, you can take a risk-based approach to addressing issues depending on their level of severity and likelihood. The second is SLCP data is credible and it's actionable. So these are things that I've talked a bit about, the actionability of the data, but really what we've done as well is developed a verification process which is robust and meets the needs of legislation, and that's something that's really critical. Unverified data or data that is just being captured, not using a formal process, maybe won't necessarily cut it when it comes to legal compliance. So this verification is really critical. The third is the CAF is mapped against international labour standards and national labour laws. Our tool, as I've mentioned before, has been embedded with the ILO Better Work program. We've designed the tool originally with the OECD due diligence guidance at front of mind. And these are things that make it unique to the CAF and why it adds value in the context of compliance. And the last point I'll make is the capacity to unlock resources to improvement programs. So with all of this legislation coming through, if you're a manufacturer, the likelihood is that there's going to be a greater need for sustainability information. There's probably going to be more requests for audits. There's definitely going to be more requests for data. So what we need to do is transition away from these proprietary approaches to frameworks that are commonly developed and can reduce the need for duplication and can free up resources to actually seize, prevent, and mitigate problems in the supply chain. So for that, this tool, the CAF, is really and has a unique added value in this context because we have 270 signatories and over 95 brands that are accepting the tool. So jumping on to the next slide. And with this, we know legislation is super complicated. And we know that there are a lot of different principles that get thrown around. But that we need to keep in mind when conducting due diligence. So here, what we've tried to do is really simplify a couple of the key principles that we see, particularly in the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, but are also very much embedded in the existing international frameworks, the UN Guiding Principles, and the OECD guidelines. And if you're a manufacturer, these are things that if you can get a basic understanding and to help implement in your facility, you're going to be seen as a progressive and well-performing manufacturer to buyers, which is an added incentive to get more business. So when it comes to responsible purchasing practices, firstly, this is something that you probably have heard quite a bit about before, and I won't go into a lot of detail on this today, but in short, we need to make sure that the tools that we're implementing facilitate good purchasing practices between brands and suppliers. So what we've done here, as I've mentioned, the reduction of audit fatigue and the ability to have data that's owned by the facility and empowers buyer-supplier relationships is critical to improving responsible purchasing practices. this audit harmonization is, or duplication, moreover, is creating this added burden on manufacturers that we need to shift away from. The second is the risk-based approach. This is something that you probably have heard of, but it basically means that we shouldn't be addressing different risks in a facility the same. They require a different measures to be able to prevent them, and we need to take a risk. And in that context, we need to take a risk-based approach based on the severity and the likelihood of that risk happening. So if there's an instance of forced labor, or if there's an instance of an issue that is easily resolvable, such as there's maybe not a guard on a machine, these are things that require very different approaches and preventative measures to ensure that they're not happening in a facility. And with this, the FSLM supports the identification of non-compliances, and it ensures through data quality processes that verifiers and stakeholders are taking a risk-based approach in the verification. The third is meaningful stakeholder engagement. So you'll notice that there's a lot of conversations going on now about this meaningful stakeholder engagement, but this is a huge topic that requires quite a lot of more analysis to be able to make very practical into what the legislators actually want out of brands when they're doing due diligence in the supply chain. So when we talk about meaningful stakeholder engagement here, we're really focusing on workers. How are we involving workers in the SLCP process? And this is something that we need to ensure that workers are heavily involved from the data collection stage all the way through to throughout the verification stage, to ensure that this data is robust and actually reflecting their perspectives. And the last principle or area I would talk about is remediation and grievance mechanisms. So with this, in due diligence, you need to be ensuring that you're remediating and you're providing an opportunity to have grievances heard. And this is something that is embedded in our worker engagement technology, an additional offering of SLCP to allow workers to directly engage with stakeholders outside of the CAF FSLM process. And then in addition to this, there are other stakeholders that we work closely with, such as the Fairware Foundation, who offer external grievance management efforts on issues identified in assessments. And there's extensive offerings throughout the industry. But before I jump into the next slide, I just want to echo, this is a highly complicated piece, or a highly complicated framework, even for lawyers in Brussels or Washington. And these principles have been developed and discussed over many, many years. So really, it's important to get a very high level grasp on what they actually mean and how they actually can empower you as manufacturers in the context of new mandatory regulation. But there's not an expectation that every single person throughout facilities in the world are going to go into great detail around every single principle in HIDD. It's about getting this general understanding. So with that, I'll jump to the next slide, which jumps to a different piece of legislation that Elizabeth has talked about earlier today, and that's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. This one's all about transparency, as Elizabeth mentioned, and about what companies within scope in the EU need to report on in the context of the sustainability reporting. So as has been put in the chat, SLCP has developed a guidance around the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, to help you understand what type of information is being used by brands to conduct their reporting. And the objectives of this is to build knowledge. So it's something that's interesting as well for manufacturers and other stakeholders to understand. And it's also really important to highlight our role and also our limitations in supporting brands with human rights disclosures under CSRD. So jumping to the next slide, similar to the toolkit, we've undertaken a very technical mapping, which you definitely do not need to try and read on this slide because I know that the writing's far too small for that. But you can see here just on a high level that workers in the value chain is one of the areas that companies need to report on as part of their CSRD reporting. And this is something that SLCP data or conducting an SLCP assessment can help provide supporting information for companies when they do this reporting. So with this, jumping to the next slide, I want to jump into, I'm conscious of time as well, so I'll jumping into what we're actually doing around further aligning the tool with policy expectations. So you can see on the screen here that, and if you're a user of the FSLM, you may be familiar that we're up to now, the CAF being the backbone of FSLM is up to version 1.6. That's the one that's been implemented throughout this year. What we'll do next year is update that to CAF 1.7. And the main reason we wanted to update the CAF next year, or one of the main reasons, was to ensure that we could further integrate questions relating to topics that are required under these new regulations that we've touched on already. So with this, you can see here that we've added questions. We've added questions that will be included in the next version of the CAF around these different topics here. So grievance mechanisms, worker involvement, privacy rights, climate impacts on working conditions, worker turnover, gender, migrant workers, and temporary and casual workers. These are all specific topics that are covered by pieces of legislation that are coming through at the moment. And what we've done is try to refine the questions in the CAF to better capture data so that it can maximize the CAF's usefulness in compliance and implementing these pieces of legislation. So jumping to the next slide, we also have further ambitions starting next year and beyond to further align the CAF for CAF 1.8 or on future versions of the CAF. And what we want to do here is really dive into some priority themes that are, again, incorporated in these pieces of legislation. So fair and living wages. The living wages is something that's captured in CSDDD. Again, we want to try and continue to refine this gender disaggregated questions so that we're collecting the data around gender and the different experiences of women and men in these facilities. We want to try and understand and better incorporate workers, both in the tool questions and also through the process of verification, ensuring that grievance mechanisms are rightly informed through a CAF assessment, and climate impacts on workers. Again, there's more refining here through the extensive work that's been done by academics to consider what are the actual, what are things like heat stress issues that workers are even increasingly experiencing in the context of climate change in facilities, and how can we capture better data on this? And the second area that we are further refining is the verification process, and also, again, as I've mentioned, worker involvement. So what does this mean for you as a manufacturer? That's why we're here today, to try and understand in a practical sense, what are the opportunities here as a manufacturer? And I know what we've probably said and are talking, and what you hear quite a lot is this new mandatory legislation is going to create all these new burdens and challenges and impacts for manufacturers. In some senses, there are going to be new challenges, and Elizabeth already highlighted a few of those earlier today. But it's really important as well to understand that you can also take these as great opportunities as manufacturers. And some of the opportunities which we're highlighting on the screen at the moment include leveraging there's a greater buyer interest now in supporting good facility conditions. So leverage that in your when you're working with buyers and direct business partners in particular, that there is a greater need and expectation that working conditions are improving. And so this is something that you can work collectively with buyers to improve. And building on that collaborative action within the supply chain. So longer term buyer-supplier relationships are going to be something that's favored in the context of legislation, because buyers can get a better understanding of what's going on in their supply chain and have more consistency around their stakeholders. You can also use SLCP data or FSLM data to support buyers in their regulatory compliance. So by undertaking a assessment, just by undertaking the assessment and sharing that information with your buyer, this is something that's helping them to comply with legislation. So that's something that's favorable and an opportunity for manufacturers, particularly maybe those who are not already using the CAF. The fourth one I'll mention is increased desirability for facilities who are demonstrating robust corporate social responsibility systems. So having good management systems, having strong grievance mechanisms and these things in place are going to be favorable when brands are trying to understand how they can best comply with this legislation. So have this in the back of your mind as well. The second last one is a greater focus on remediation and improvements where issues are present. So often a lot of the focus to date has really been on audits and trying to find out what the problems are. This is going to shift, and what we need to do is use things like a common framework like the CAF to do one social assessment, and then a lot of the brand and stakeholder efforts are going to really be put on actual improvement programs, things like trainings and capacity building on specific issues where there are problems. This is where there's going to be a greater focus, and this is something that, with great interest from leading manufacturers, we can really you can create an opportunity to be seen as a front runner. And the last one I mentioned is a regulatory push for directly involving stakeholders, including workers, in the human rights due diligence process. So there's going to be a greater need for workers to be engaged and involved in when you're conducting an FSLM or CAF assessment. So making sure that the workers are actively involved and you're inputting data in your self-assessment that clearly involves workers and their representatives is something that's, again, going to be looked on as favorably when in the context of regulatory compliance. So I think the last slide is the next slide from me, and I'm going to stop talking because I've been going on for a while now. But finishing off, what I want to do is talk through some really practical actions for manufacturers for you to prepare for the upcoming legislation. So the first one, which you're already doing today, engage with your EU partners. So engage with your brands, but also MSIs that you're involved with as well, to better understand what these pieces of legislation actually are. And that leads into the second point, which is assess the applicability. So determine and think about and try to understand better how the EU, CSDDD, and other pieces of legislation directly apply to you and your customers. It's going to be different per manufacturer and per stakeholder. So this is something that you should try and understand in your own unique situation. And from there, you can better grasp what you need to do to help compliance. Which brings me to the third point, which is aligning your company policies with thematic standards. So you need to ensure that the way that your facility and your operations are meeting or aligned with the standards that are set in the CSDDD, particularly when you see in the annex. So making sure that this is aligned is a very good first step in being seen as a front-running manufacturer. The fourth is complete supply trainings and build your knowledge. So we've already shared quite a number of resources today to get started in terms of building your knowledge specific on FSLM and the CAF. But there's so many other free supply chain trainings and opportunities to further learn about legislation and how this impacts you as a supplier. The fifth is conduct a risk-based mapping of your supply chain. So with this, taking maybe a two-pronged approach, identify potential risks which are within your own operation as a supplier, and then also understand where there's areas of improvement, not just within your own operation, but within your supply chain as well. These are things that are really helpful when conducting human rights due diligence, and are really critical to understand when using that risk-based approach, which I talked about earlier. And the last step I want to mention is, if you're not already, implement a grievance mechanism and stakeholder engagement measures. So ensuring that you have a scaled, effective grievance mechanism, and that you're also facilitating proper engagement with stakeholders, so workers, trade unions, and civil society, is critical to ensuring that there is robust due diligence processes within your facility and your supply chain. And this is a really practical way to start doing this, is to ensure that you are working within your supply chain to facilitate these conversations already. And again, your EU partners will be able to help with more information, and there's extensive information which we can also provide to you if you have specific questions on any of these. So in summary, and to close it out, I think the message I want to share with you as stakeholders and members of Cascale and beyond is that the critical thing is that we all just start. There's a lot that needs to change and develop to facilitate good compliance with these pieces of legislation coming through. But the important thing today is to not just get overwhelmed because there's so much technical jargon, but actually just start by doing some of these very practical things that we have on the screen here, because this is a way that we can help with, alongside using tools such as FSLM and the CAF, we can really help you on your compliance journey, and that will inevitably benefit you as manufacturers for being front-running manufacturers in this new regulated environment. So with that, I will stop there and hand it back to you, Gabby.
Thank you, Tom. Just as a reminder to all participants, please submit your questions and upvote. You can click the thumbs up to the ones that you find more pressing or more interesting, and those will be the first ones we will address. So to give a step back, at the beginning, I mentioned that Cascale and SLCP are actively deepening their strategic collaboration to better align tools and strategies to improve global working conditions. As part of this work, we've developed a public affairs joint vision statement with some concrete examples of how we are committed to supported members in different areas. Now, Elizabeth, why don't you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes, thanks, Gabby, and also thanks, Tom, for the very interesting assessment. So yes, collaboration and our joint public affairs vision statement. So yes, teased and mentioned already earlier. We are now actually today very proud to really, like, this first time we officially announced the vision statement. And indeed, what does it mean? I mean, it does include areas where we as SLCP and Cascale committed to together. So the elements are establishing consistent strategic interactions, educating and learning from our members and signatories, such as with session today. Aligning on tools, regulations, and messaging. So aligning amongst ourselves, amplifying co-developed positions, cross-promotion, active participation, and learning from engagements, driving policy acceptance, and developing a shared policy vision. Yes, what does it mean? The key initiatives include regular strategic touch points to align tools, regulations, messaging, educating signatories, and so on. Cross-participation, webinars, meetings, roundtable discussions, and to really work together. So these are here like a couple of examples, like what does it mean in practice? So yes, past initiatives include like the human rights SLCP due diligence toolkits, where of course we as Cascale like fed in or like were asked like make sure like to align the messaging, also amplifying co-developed positions. So that one very specific example we're very proud of was yes, our input, where we really collaborated to provide input into the Policy Hub position on the EU forced labor regulations. So this was, you know, like leveraging SLCP and Cascale's expertise, and this was really fed in and then directly sent to policymakers. And then we used like of course Policy Hub contacts and structures, and they have really, I mean, Policy Hub are the advocacy channel who have the access to these decision makers, and this way we were able to really feed in at the like right time that expertise on this specific piece of legislation. Another one is yes, on, you know, promotion active participation, is SLCP joining Cascale at the annual meeting to contribute to different panels, including the navigating legislation and the Higg Index in-person session. So this is right part of the webinar series you actually joined today. So actually this webinar is yet another example of our collaboration. And indeed, together we advocate for integrating Higg Index data, particularly Higg FSLM, SLCP data into social policy frameworks. Like another example is on the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, where currently in Brussels there's like guidance materials being developed, which like explains what the legislation actually means in practice, goes into like dive into more detail. And this is something where SLCP, together with Policy Hub, of course, also Cascale feeding in, is developing a handbook for use of the European Commission to again feed into that. So one very nitty gritty example. Yeah, with that, I think this was my slide. But just very like as in finalizing, as I said, today the first time we announce this vision statement, and we are very excited to publish it in the next days. I'm saying, I think even later this week. So do watch out for the statement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now it's Wordly's turn to show you how the tools can help you in action and how you can best use your data hosted on the Wordly platform. So Vic, the floor is yours. We might have some connection issues. Can you hear Vic? No? Okay. Just bear with us for 1 minute. Apologies for the technical hiccup. We're checking if Vic can reconnect. Maybe we can go through to the Q&A, and then we can come back to Wordly slides. Apologies again for that. So now, yes, let's explore. Okay, so now let's explore some of the voted questions. that were submitted by the audience in the Q&A box. So one of the questions we received was, will you be able to reflect on EUDR? EUDR would be the European Union Deforestation Regulation, and possibly how CAF will incorporate some of the data points. Now, maybe this could be a question for Tom.
Sure, I can quickly answer this question, and then I can hand it back to Vic, who I can see is back on the line. Rakesh, thanks for the question. EUDR is a little bit out of the scope of the CAF and FSLM in a couple of ways, but the main one basically being that as it's relating to deforestation, and the CAF and FSLM is relating specifically to working conditions in the facility. So we don't capture data, I guess, outside of the facility. So this is really something that I would recommend looking to other tools to help understand and capture the right data that you need for EUDR, because this is not really something that would necessarily fall within the scope of an FSLM or CAF assessment, which is specific to working conditions within just also the manufacturing stage, as we mentioned before, not all the way down to raw materials where a lot of the issues around deforestation are prevalent. So hopefully that answers your question, but feel free to reach out if you need more clarification. And I don't know if Cascale have anything to add as well.
Thanks, Tom. I think also looking at the time, we can go back to or at least a few words on how to best use data. So again, Vic, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Terribly sorry. I was like suddenly all in a sudden in the hotel, they just cut off the network. I'm currently on my mobile network, so hopefully it could last my entire 5 slides. So where was I? I was mentioning we actually have 5 tools already on the platform, which is help users with the emerging regulatory disclosure, includes first, the Higg FSLM, which we will discuss in this webinar in the coming slides. I would also like to quickly introduce others, which includes the Higg Facility Environmental Module, which help the users to gather annual environmental data from supply chain partners. The brand retail modules, which helps brands and retailers evaluate the impact of their operations. The product impact calculator, we just recently launched a couple months ago, which help you calculate the scope-free emission of your entire supply chain. And then last but not least, the Facility Data Manager is another newer product that we enable user to gather the monthly GHG emission, waste, water consumption from the supply chain partner on a monthly basis, so that you can see how you're tracking on key targets on a regular basis. So to learn more about those, feel free to reach out with us. And then for FSLM, what this is really about. So it is an industry tool, obviously, to connect social data and also to measure the social impact in supply chain, cover different areas, as already mentioned, which also help the manufacturers to drive continued improvement as well. So the tool is built on the Convert framework on the Social and Labor Converge Program, SLCP. Our partner Cascale has developed the scoring methodology for FSLM. With that, the user can really see the score FSLM assessment result in Rowley platform. It not only helps improving the social and labor condition for supply chain workers, but also supporting the user to track progress year over year and reduce audit fatigue for facility around the world in general. So obviously, there's a very significant value in helping brands as well in supporting their disclosure under the CSRD and CSDDD. So to begin with, like I mentioned already, live sections that is covered in FSLM. So in those areas, you can further zoom in, for example, on recruitment and hiring, termination, employment treatment. You can have more insight from them regarding the human right and labor standard. Whereas for the recruitment and hiring, it covers some related topics on the diversity, inclusions, gender balance, and also on other areas, the employee treatment, and also for health and safety, you can further look into how the work hours is like in the facility, and also if the workers are being paid according to the minimum wage, etc. And then on the employees engagements areas, you can look into the people empowerment, if there's any like community activities happening in the facility like that. So this is the coverage on the FSLM. However, on Wellly platform, we really want to make sure those assessment results more digestible and user-friendly. So we adding additional summaries on those areas, and also adding the scoring methodology that is developed by Cascale, which included you can have a summary related to the legal compliance, different scoring, and also like zoom in the areas that the facility need to take actions in improving. So to start with, talking about the scoring, we basically have three different types of scores. So the first one is the session scores. It really related how the facility is performing in a specific session. So for example, we mentioned about health and safety, or the wages and benefit. So assume in these particular sessions, out of 100 points, how well the facility is performing. The second one is the STEP scores. So for those who are already familiar with the FSLM, we understand that the question is being broken down into 3 different steps, from step 1 to 3, focusing on the basic compliance, legal compliance question, all the way to above and beyond, related to the best practices. Those are not really related to the legal compliance issue. So for the STEP scores, it helps you to understand how advanced the facility social program is like. And then last but not least, for the risk scores, this is the overall performance of the question, which is categorized in different risk level. For example, zero tolerance, high, mid-level, or those is related to the legal compliance issue. So you have the overview for zero tolerance. It could be related to the child labor, forced labor. So on those areas, you will have a better understanding how your facility is performing in those high-risk areas. And then for the areas of improvement, you can take it as like a quick summary. So instead of asking you to read the entire FSLM report, it is a downloadable summary, including all the opportunities for improvement that the facility can focus and prioritize their resource on. So it is quite commonly being used to communicate with the facility by brand, asking them to develop a corrective action plan based on those issues is listed. And also for legal compliance areas, you can take it as like a further zoom in from the areas of improvement. So we understand that the top priority for everyone is to sort out any non-compliance issue, which is related to the legal requirement. So we also have that cover to make sure that you can easily to access from the FSLM report to highlight which areas you want to spend more time on. So there's also other value add features in the platform. For example, the industry benchmarking, the gap analysis on the verification result. However, those is not closely related to the legislation. That's the key topics for today. So I just give those features. So again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any question or you want more questions. With that, I will pass it back to Gabby. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vic. We're a bit tight on time, so we will take one more question from the Q&A. I have seen that our dear panelists have answered also some of the questions on the chat. So please feel free to read the answers there. And now for the last question, I'm gonna ask, how do you make sure brands are using the assessments for the whole supply chain and not only for tier 1, and are not coming with additional audits, which is still the case, although they are signatories? Now, Tom, would you like to take this one?
Sure, thanks, Gabby. And great question. This is something that we're working extensively on with our signatory brands in particular to try and avoid, because the whole idea around SLCP is reducing this audit fatigue and duplication. So to start with, what we're doing, and we're working very closely with Cascale on this, is we're committed to pressuring and ensuring that our brands and users of FSLM and the CAF are shifting away from their proprietary tools to the CAF and towards common frameworks such as FSLM. So this is something that we're working closely with Cascale on, because the CAF is the preferred social assessment in line with the FSLM membership requirements. In terms of going further down the supply chain, so what we're seeing is quite a lot of our brands are increasingly using the CAF in their tier 2 and tier 3 in their supply chain, which is fantastic to see. A lot of suppliers in tier 2 and tier 3 we're finding are quite new to this. So we are trying to ensure that there is extensive information and resources there to help encourage our brands to use the CAF in tier 2 and tier 3. We're also hearing on the flip side a few newer brands that are joining SLCP that there's actually an increased need for a common assessment in tier 2, given how their supply chain is developed. So this is something we're working closely with our brands on. We're very much opposed to brands conducting additional assessments to a CAF, and this is something that we're trying to shift away from in collaboration with Cascale as well. But there's still a lot of work to do, and yes, there are still a lot of different audits out there, and we're aware of that, and we're working hard to try and address that, particularly for our signatory brands. I'll leave it there, but there's plenty more to discuss offline as well.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tom. Well, sadly, we don't have more time for questions. However, I hope you found this Q&A useful, and you can submit any of your remaining questions to policy@cascale.org or to Wordly's and SLCP's email that you will find at the very end of this slide deck. Now, before wrapping up, let's hear some closing remarks from Orin on our ongoing work on Higg FEM. Over to you, Orin.
Thanks, Gabriel. A quick sneak peek what is coming up when it comes to FEM. Not going to take much time, but whoever fills FEM, they would get a few information here. When it comes to FEM 2024 cadence, which is going to come in FEM in 2025, the first update is expansion of verification here. In FEM 2023 cadence, we had only few questions in level 1 were been verified, a few set of questions. Whereas when it comes to FEM 2024 cadence, it would be all the level 1 questions would be verified. It gives, like, it is kind of, this will help in positive step towards which we are looking at complete verification of FEM 4.0, because as it was been launched this year. So that is something which is coming for FEM 2024 cadence. The next changes which we are looking at here is when it comes to level 1. Earlier it was only level 1 achieving was there, but now for next year, if at all level 1 is also not achieved, the facilities can also go ahead and fill in for level 2 and level 3, see where exactly they can work on and how they can work for further. So that is something which they can look at and work on it. And the third changes is FDM. Briefly, we did speak about FDM. FDM is a facility data manager, where it is a monthly data tool which will be filled in with regards to the environment data. This would be the changes is it is integrated with Higg FEM, where later it's a monthly data, and if it is frequently used, it can be automatically populated in annual FEM module for FEM 2025 cadence. So that is the few updates which is coming for next year. Over to you, Gabby.
Thanks, Orin. Now, what's next? So we'll be sharing a recording of today's webinar very shortly via email, so keep an eye on your inbox. And you can also look for the recording on YouTube, on our YouTube channel and our members-only platform, Cascale Connect. There we will include additional resources like details about Cascale and SLCP's joint vision statement, and also you can also find other relevant reports, documents, and information. This is a Cascale member-only platform. Now, I also encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter, to our, let's say, public affairs newsletter, which you can find the opt-in link in the chat down below. And we would love you to opt in to receive our public affairs and policy updates and specific communications. Now, a few other upcoming events I would like to highlight for you. There are SLCP events in India on November 19th and 22nd. Attendees will hear about regulatory updates, gain a deeper understanding on human rights due diligence, and understand also how SLCP can support with HRDD and explore insights from SLCP's latest data. Also, Cascale's Brand and Retail Forum 2024 is coming up later in 4 and 5th December in Brussels, Belgium. This forum is a very, very good opportunity to connect with industry leaders and discuss sustainable practices in our industry, not only limited to brands and retailers despite the name. So I encourage also all of you manufacturers watching to consider attending. You can find also more details via the link in the chat. And also, please don't miss our Higg FEM 2024 launch webinar that is coming up on November 14th, hosted by Cascale and Wordly. We really encourage you to tune in for this session. Also check the link in the chat for more details. Sorry, I'm speeding up, but I really wanna make you end on time. So finally, looking ahead, the next edition of our Navigating Legislation and the Higg Index webinar series will be held in Q1 2025. The date is not announced yet, will be announced coming up. So that webinar will be focused on Higg facility tools, particularly FEM. So stay tuned for further details. If you have any questions, as I said before, you can see our website or our email addresses in the screen. Thank you again for being with us today. We really look forward to seeing you at our upcoming events. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Until next time, have a great day. Bye-bye.